Space, the final frontier. Home of infinite vastness, limitless possibility, and now, the rarest spirit ever made? Join me for a tale of human ambition, extraterrestrial creation, and whiskey. Enjoy. Hey everybody, Drillin' in the Name of here, and today we're obviously doing something a little bit different. I recently stumbled upon a really crazy story that only got crazier the more I looked into it. It took me down such a long rabbit hole and made for such a compelling story that I felt like I had to share it here. It admittedly turned into a long one because the story kept evolving the more I looked into it. But there are twists and turns up till the very end, so I promise it's worth it. It all started with that bold claim, the rarest spirit ever made. Well, actually two bold claims, because it's also being touted as the world's first commercial product to be manufactured in space. Now this is red flag number one, because obviously it would be impossible to distill alcohol in space. So they're either really stretching the definition of manufacturing, or they're just being a little disingenuous right off the bat. This ultra-exclusive product is known as Mystic Galactic. It's being made by Mystic Farm and Distilling Company in Durham, North Carolina, and they're on one hell of a campaign to legitimize this project. In the article where I first heard about this, they describe what seemed to be the three major talking points surrounding Mystic Galactic, the two I already mentioned, and the price. Now, I want you to take a second and just think of a number. And remember, this is the rarest spirit ever made, and the first product to be manufactured in space. Think you got it? Probably not, because Mystic Galactic is going to set you back a whopping $75,000. Now this is obviously red flag number two, because the premise is already a little shaky, and $75K is an insane amount of money for a bottle of liquor. And don't get me wrong, expensive alcohol is not unheard of, but when a bottle of booze sells for a massive sum of money, there's usually an established brand and product behind it. What we're talking about hasn't even been made yet. Sorry, did I not mention they haven't made it yet? That's right. As the article states, Galactic will be aged 3 years on the ground and 1 year in space. This brings us to red flag number three, as we now have a dubious claim attached to a $75,000 product that hasn't even been made yet. But enough of this secondhand account. It's time to get some info directly from the horse's mouth, so let's head over to mysticgalactic.com. Red flag number four. Maybe this one isn't that serious, but with the amount of money we're talking about, you'd think they'd be able to afford some better web design, or at least get some footage that isn't so grainy. I mean, what is this? Like, I know it's a still, but what is this shot? This is especially weird in contrast with the website for the distillery itself, which is totally normal and professional looking. We do get some promising information here, where it says the purchase price includes a flight case and a 50 milliliter sample, but then you glance over to the image next to it, and it's photoshopped. Badly. I don't understand why they couldn't just put their dummy bottle in a flight case for this photo. Do they not have the flight cases yet, either? Finally, they cap off the page with an incredibly generic party video. It starts with this woman with a weird thing on her head, which I guess is supposed to look futuristic? But this would be a pretty bleak future for Mystic Galactic, as not a single person in the video is drinking bourbon. This video seems really out of place with the rest of the page, but don't worry, there's an explanation. The Mystic Galactic NFT is the key to the exclusive access to launch and re-entry celebrations. Alright, I'm actually going to give this 3 red flags. One for each letter. It's 2023 now, and if that acronym doesn't set off alarm bells in your head, you're probably either still hodling, or you're lucky enough to have never heard that combination of letters before. But NFTs have become an incredibly popular scam in the past few years, and should at the very least give you pause when they're attached to a project. Well, we have a bunch of information now, but I still feel like I have nothing but questions, so let's check out the FAQ. First question, what is Mystic Galactic? Good place to start. Galactic is a vision made real, an ultra-luxury experience, and the evolution of spirits beyond mere exclusivity. Barf. This may be a sincere statement, but so far pretty much the only thing we know is how exclusive this product is. Galactic goes beyond the mere purchase of a bottle. Those who acquire Mystic Galactic join the mission and accompany us at every step. Well, this actually may be the first true claim, as the company seems to have taken 0 steps so far. As with all great journeys, we will celebrate our milestones, launch and recovery, with ultra-luxury celebrations near key locations. Only those who have joined the mission and their guests may attend. That's nice, but it doesn't really do much to dispel the notion that exclusivity is pretty much the only selling point so far. The About the Spirits section, however, states that our distillers have won 2 consecutive gold medals at the prestigious San Francisco World Spirits Competition, signifying that Mystic set the standard for bourbon in 2021 and 2022. That seems legit. These elements, along with the skill of Mystic's distillation team, produce the best bourbon in the world, and soon enough, the solar system. Wait. and now the solar system. You haven't made it yet. Alright, the next frequently asked question is, how will Galactic compare to Earth-aged bourbon? This has to be where the meat is. There's only one way to find out. Well, there's only one way to find out, and you get to fund the R&D. That's such an incredible opening statement to answer that question with. Fuck if I know is not a great way to ask someone for $75,000. They go on to boast that only a few will ever know, which again is kind of funny coming from the people that just said that Mystic Galactic transcends mere exclusivity. This next section asks what's special about it besides orbital aging, and they respond by describing how it's basically the same juice as the rest of their bourbons, so I guess the answer is nothing. When asked why age in outer space, they once again tell on themselves and pretty much just say they want to get to it before anyone else does. But the next section, which details the state of North Carolina's role in the project, is where things get a little more interesting. There's a massive amount of engineering that goes into any space launch. Add the complexity of bringing the payload back through a fiery re-entry and landing it, this mission becomes almost as difficult as human space flight. Which, no it doesn't. They go on to say that the physics of a barrel in orbit and on re-entry present interesting questions of thermodynamics, fluid mechanics, orbital mechanics, and virtually every aspect of aerospace engineering. This part I actually agree with. If you didn't know, barrels aren't held together by glue or nails or anything like that. The staves are just fitted closely together, and when the barrel's filled with liquid, the wood absorbs that liquid and swells, which fills in the gaps in between those staves. Now, this works great on Earth, but I have no idea how the barrels would maintain their integrity when leaving the Earth's atmosphere. More on that later. Mystic continues by saying they're working with a group of the world's top spaceflight contractors, and that they are very fortunate to have one of the world's top aeronautical engineering programs literally down the road from our distillery. Now, I don't know what their definition of down the road is, but I guess NC State's Department of Mechanical and Aeronautical Engineering is down the road-ish, and I guess Collins Aerospace is down a few roads and a couple highways. Also, who is naming towns in this state? Either way, this just feels like kind of an empty statement. If Mr. Beast lived down the street from me, I could say I'm very fortunate to have such a successful YouTuber for a neighbor, but that doesn't mean he's hanging out in my basement helping me with my videos. The only real involvement they actually spell out is that they'll maintain their own mission control center at NC State's Centennial campus. All I can picture is a bunch of distillers taking over the AV department and disrupting the daily announcements or something. Next, we finally get some numbers, with Mystic saying they expect between 1,000 and 1,500 bottles. Even on the low end, if 1,000 people buy this, you're looking at $75 million. Up next, they forgot to rename this FAQ title. This section is about the experience, and although they spend a very lengthy paragraph basically repeating everything they've already said, we do get some spicy nuggets at the end. We will be making charges against your deposit as the events are scheduled and the app is made available. If we are unable to deliver the bourbon, you will receive a refund of the deposit funds, less any event admissions and app access charges incurred up to that point. So basically, they've created a GoFundMe for a sick party. I mean, it really sounds like they're just funding an ultra-luxury event with the deposit money of the people that have invested in their project. At no point do they mention how much the app or these events will cost, but with all this language about ultra-exclusive premium luxury, they could theoretically charge any crazy amount. I mean, if you're dropping $75,000 on a bottle of bourbon, you're probably not going to bat an eye at, say, $10,000 for an extremely lavish event. Now, in Mystic Farm's defense, I did sign up to purchase, obviously. And it does seem like they aren't asking for the deposit yet. In fact, the only correspondence I received was an email from the distillery itself. Now, I was expecting some kind of welcome to the mission type email with more hyperbolic buzzwords, but instead it was just a thank you for signing up for the distillery's newsletter. So I guess I get their newsletter now. Finally, we get an explanation for why they're using NFTs. We struggled initially to create a system for tracking the ownership of the bourbon and how to know to whom we are transferring this stupendously rare and expensive asset. The blockchain provides authentication of the bourbon purchase from the moment we take the deposit. Just as importantly, verifying ownership of the NFT at the time of pickup ensures that only the proper party is given possession of the spirit once it returns to Earth. They say at the bottom of the page that in-person pickup is required, so I don't understand how an NFT is more accurate or secure than just showing a photo ID that matches the name on the deposit. If that's good enough for me to vote, I think it's good enough for me to pick up a bottle of bourbon. An asset this expensive is virtually certain to spawn counterfeits and confusing transfers of ownership before, during, and after release. Starting to sound a little paranoid now. The NFT based on the Ethereum blockchain represents the best current technology for assuring the bourbon's authenticity at purchase. This part made no sense to me because my ownership of an NFT does nothing to ensure that they're actually giving me a bottle of space bourbon. I think all this talk of security and protection from bad actors and counterfeiters is just another way to artificially create demand. Even their contact page warns that it might take a while for them to get back to you because of the high volume of inquiries they receive. Obviously, I can't say whether or not that's true, but I can say that as of this recording, their Twitter page only has 18 followers, and their YouTube channel, which only has one video, also only has one subscriber. Now, the good news is that one subscriber wasn't me, so there is at least one other person interested in their channel. Unless it's them. So far, this thing just seems really bizarre and poorly thought out. I'm not really sure who this is even for. The app and NFT aspect may be there to attract younger wealthy people, but anyone even remotely close to my age would see right through that cheesy website. The price point is likely more accessible to older wealthy people, but they're not going to know what an NFT is or what to do with it. And we haven't even really gotten into the logistics of this project yet. Obviously, we already know that the first product manufactured in space claim isn't true, because they've already said that they're making it here on Earth first. But even setting that aside, the mere concept of sending barrels of liquid to space is absurd. It just seems like there's no way they would survive the rigors of space travel. Now, I'm just a bartender with a YouTube channel, so I'm not qualified to speak on that with any certainty. Thankfully, I have a lot of friends that are a lot smarter than I am, one of which happens to be an aerospace engineer. I reached out to Space Badger to get his thoughts on the plausibility of space-aged bourbon.
Well, so anyway, I guess a good place to start would be your qualifications, if you'd care to share that.
Yeah, I work in the environmental controls and life support system, working on the thermal control system and pressure control systems for a spacecraft and future space station.
Well, it sounds like you're qualified to give your opinion on the matter.
Got some experience in controlling temperature and oxygen, and that's pretty much what aging these things is.
Right. So I guess just on its face, kind of the first thing that struck me was, obviously barrels are held together by pressure. You swell the barrel, the liquid expands the wood, that seals the cracks, and that's what holds the liquid inside of it. So would that be able to survive leaving the atmosphere in a spacecraft, would be my first question.
I mean, it would survive being on Earth, and it would survive being in space okay. The in-between phase, though, is going to get real rough. The vibrational loadings of launching a vehicle into space are pretty intense. So your standard, wooden saved barrel, I can't imagine holding together. There's a reason we don't build ships out of wood. So if they had that whole thing encased in, an aluminum shell or something to help keep it from falling apart, maybe.
So you could maybe wrap it in something that would maintain the structural integrity, possibly?
Yeah, but then you're also then shielding the barrel from the temperature fluctuations on the outside. Which is part of the aging process.
Right. So I guess one thing I was kind of having a hard time finding a layman's answer on is, what is the difference between LEO and what we generally refer to as outer space?
Low Earth orbit is where the International Space Station is. That's about 200 miles straight up. That's not really that far when you compare it to like geosynchronous orbit or where some of our weather satellites are. So it's relatively close to Earth, but still definitely outside of 99% of our atmosphere.
Well, now that we know exactly where this is going, I asked what it's going to cost.
Currently, even with the boom in private things launching, it still costs about $10,000 per pound to get to orbit.
This is a great bit of info because now we can do a little math. I'm guessing they'll need about 5 barrels to get back between 1,000 and 1,500 bottles, and at around 520 pounds each, you're looking at $26 million just for the orbit alone. This obviously doesn't even include the costs of producing the whiskey itself, the packaging, the events, the app. But now that we have an estimate of the cost, I asked Space Badger what he thinks the result will be.
So if you had to guess, if you were to actually get the barrels up there, what would the difference be aging in low Earth orbit versus just aging it here, aside from just getting to call it space whiskey?
What do they have in orbit we don't have here is significantly more high energy radiation. I don't think there's going to be any interactions between, cosmic rays or anything that the sun's pumping out and bourbon.
It also seems like you wouldn't want that either way.
It wreaks havoc on DNA and living cells, but it just kind of hits everything else. Part of the mystery is what they expect to see for heating and cooling, because cooling's actually surprisingly hard in space. Space is very cold, but it's not so much that it's bitterly cold all around you, it's that it's rare. The thing is in orbit, moving sideways at 17,000 miles an hour, and it orbits the planet once every 90 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So in terms of having a heating and a cooling cycle, you're 45 minutes in direct sunlight, 45 minutes in the Earth's shadow, depending if you're orbiting around the equator. So if this is in the sun for a long period of time heating up, they got to find some way to cool it back down. Otherwise, all you're doing is boiling bourbon.
It would seem, I guess, to me, who doesn't know anything, that re-entry would be more violent than exiting the atmosphere.
That's the experience I've had for designing the components that we've made so far.
So I guess the concern is, even if they get it up there and it's up there for a year and everything's going according to plan, there's still a chance that there's something more violent on the way back that could just spoil it at the last second.
Yeah, I mean, the capsules land pretty hard. They're still going about 30 miles an hour when they hit the ground or water, which it doesn't sound very fast, but when you go from 30 miles an hour to 0,
right,
that's a big jerk.
I mean, it just, with everything that I've seen so far and what you're saying, it's hard to see it really as anything but a gimmick, which, I mean, gimmicks are fine, but it's at the price point it's at, the audience has to be so small.
Yeah, I mean, space memorabilia is a big business, and getting things that have actually been into orbit, we've only put so many things up there. So for anyone who wants to have a piece of space history, I could see the draw of wanting it. But as far as it affecting the bourbon, I can't see anything happening to it in orbit that we can't do on Earth much cheaper.
Well, thank you so much for doing the interview. I appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. If you find anything else being launched into space, let me know.
Will do.
So there you have it. Although neither of us can say anything truly definitive, I think it's fair to have a decent amount of skepticism about this project. I'll admit I hadn't considered the souvenir aspect, and I'm sure that novelty is enough for someone out there to justify that price point. I guess for me it would feel a little more honest as more of a gold coin ad you see when you wake up on the couch at 3 a.m. At this point I was about ready to wrap up the video because I didn't think there was much else to say. But I'm kind of a sap, and I was starting to feel bad. What if this truly is a passion project? A small group of incredibly determined people simply trying to do something that's never been done before. One small step for bourbon, one giant leap for bourbon kind, so to speak. I decided to dig a little deeper, and I was so relieved to find that it is totally okay to make fun of these people. I came across an interview with Mystic Farm co-founder Jonathan Blitz, and it is something.
They're putting juice on the Mississippi River on barges.
Amateurs.
This is less than 10 seconds into the interview.
Amateurs.
I'll be honest, this immediately absolved me of any guilt I felt for goofing on Mystic Galactic. Whether this was a joke or not, it comes across as so incredibly condescending, especially when you consider the fact that the amateurs he's referring to have actually made their product.
Amateurs.
You will have the first out-of-this-world juice.
Yes, we are going to age at least 5 barrels in low Earth orbit.
This confirms my estimate for what I thought they would have to put up there for what they expect to get back, and it really locks in our cost estimate from Space Badger.
It's called Mystic Galactic, and it comes with a 50 mil, so you can taste it without opening the big bottle. It is very expensive. We don't know what the final release price will be.
What?
But people who buy, put a deposit down now, they're going to get their bottle for $75,000.
Ah, the old early bird special.
When it comes back, who knows what the price is going to be.
Once we get these deposits out of the way, we can test the secondary market and see what these babies are really worth.
One thing I absolutely want to make clear, as it's come up in some of the media coverage, we are not using those purchase deposits to fund the mission. The only withdrawals are for the celebrations at launch and recovery.
Which, again, you haven't even given an educated guess as to what those might cost.
But if we don't deliver the bottle, the money gets refunded.
I've touched on this, but it's never really been explained what that means. Mystic Farms seems like a really small company, and I have no idea how they could eat that cost if they aren't able to bottle and sell a final product. Again, this is why this deposit system seems so fishy.
Well, in full transparency, you do have a law background.
Yeah, I don't want to go to federal prison for securities law issues.
Yeah.
And we've been very careful about keeping the SEC out of this. It is a purchase deposit.
I lost track of how many red flags we're at, but this seems like a pretty big one. If I owned a funeral home and I said I was doing everything in my power to keep the FBI away, I think that would raise a few eyebrows. It's especially telling to bring that up while clumsily trying to explain the need to incorporate NFTs.
And I know crypto's scary for a lot of people.
Yes.
Think about this. If I sell these bottles, right, I'm selling them online. You buy one, you happen to live in Dubai. 2 years from now, you show up at my distillery. We're going to have like an email you printed out, and I'm going to hand you a bottle of bourbon that might be worth $100,000
It's already gone up 33%.
just based on you holding up an email.
This is such a weird and specific hypothetical. Like, his big concern is that someone in the UAE somehow would have heard of this, bought a bottle, completely forgot about it for 2 years, and then show up in North Carolina with a Gmail printout. Does he not know what a driver's license is?
But if you have that NFT and can do a private key transaction and validate your ownership of it, there's zero risk because you're the original guy or the guy who bought it from the guy.
Weren't you just worried about confusing transfers in your FAQ?
Look, you don't get into this business, or for that matter, for a lot of businesses without doing the right things, because you end up going to jail for it, right?
Right. Well,
so
Notice how uncomfortable Jonathan gets at the mention of going to jail for doing this the wrong way. He has an almost immediate and visceral reaction to the word jail.
jail for it, right?
Right.
well,
And I'm sure that's totally normal.
To me, if that goes up in the orbiter, and the G-force is going to sling that. So hang on. I'm the subject matter expert.
Finally!
In all transparency, many of you know that my background is NASCAR auto racing.
Oh.
And in the downsizing of NASCAR, it's not coincidental that Elon Musk reached out.
Oh.
I was very honored to be in the Challenger with Todd Bodine prior to it going up.
Oh. That's a little morbid.
Now, it's a very challenging thing to say what's it going to taste like and how
I don't think anybody knows. Nobody knows what it's going to taste like.
It kind of sounds like the subject matter expert was about to share his theory, but Jonathan was very quick to cut him off.
I don't think anybody knows. You get these, I mean, you know, the internet has experts on everything. They don't hesitate on Reddit to tell you exactly how it's going to taste.
Right.
Or whether it will do anything or not. You know, my favorite comment is, it's not going to do anything. It's got to do something.
This just sounds a little desperate. It's less, it's got to do something by virtue of what's happening, and more, it's got to do something or I'll have $75 million egg on my face. The problem here is that while something is certain to happen, he refuses to even speak in hypotheticals as to what that something may be. Even in a very softball setting that is clearly tailor-made to sell his product, he can't even guess as to what the final product will be. I can't help but wonder if he's being especially careful with his words due to that fancy law background.
I don't want to go to federal prison.
This all leads to the much larger question of what if it actually makes it back, but it sucks? I guess if you're just in it for the souvenir aspect, it may not matter to you, but in my opinion, at least part of the goal here should be to create a bourbon that is both revolutionary and also tastes good. But by that point, Mystic will already have their money, so I guess it doesn't really matter.
So one of the things you hit upon is those G-forces, especially on re-entry. You're slamming into the atmosphere, 26,000 miles an hour. Well, think about it. If you take a barrel of bourbon off the rack, roll it across the room, and you stop, it's going to continue to rock back and forth with a huge inertial moment. You have, you know, by the time you got Angel's Share, you got maybe 38 gallons that's sloshing around in there.
See, this is what I meant earlier. Maybe I'm just being rude and I'm not letting him finish. It sounds like we might finally get some insight as to what this experiment might do to the whiskey.
Well, that sloshing could destabilize the orbiter.
Never mind.
So it's going to be pushing that bourbon just from centripetal force out.
Centripetal who?
Centripetal force.
Got it.
And then it became something where we were talking about cost, you know? And initially I was like, nobody will pay more than $20,000 a bottle. And then that just doesn't work. Like, you can't get to orbit for that. You can't do it.
While this also lines up with our estimate, it still doesn't explain how they plan to do this. If they're truly not using that deposit money to fund the mission, I would assume they have investors, but if they wind up with no bottles to sell, I would think they're still beholden to those investors. Now obviously this is all speculation, but with all these red flags piling up, I would just like a better understanding of how a company this size is able to make such an incredibly expensive and incredibly risky investment.
And so eventually we landed on the price of $75,000 because we know we can do the mission for that.
Again, if it ever makes it into a bottle.
It seems like a lot. I mean, it obviously is, you know, objectively, it's a lot of money. But at the same time, when you think about having something that only 1,000 people in the world are going to own, or 1,500 people in the world are going to own, and then you think about the fact that so few people in this world are ever even going to taste it. You know, it becomes an object of desire. It becomes something that is truly unique. Every drop that is in that bottle that is bourbon was in space.
Why did he say that like such a weirdo?
Drop.
This does bring up an interesting point though. That bourbon's gonna get proofed down with boring old earth water, so not all the liquid in those bottles will be space liquid.
Amateurs.
By this point in the interview, I was getting a little distracted because something he said earlier was really sticking out in my mind.
We've been very careful about keeping the SEC out of this. It is a purchase deposit.
I couldn't place exactly why, but the way he phrased that felt significant. I'm obviously no lawyer, but this could be a way of ensuring that Mystic is seen as a commodity rather than a security. He already said the deposit money's not being used to fund the mission, aka not an investment into the project or the distillery itself. And while buying commodities benefits the purchaser by locking in a price in the event that the value goes up by the time the product is available, it also benefits the seller in the event that the value goes down, aka it ends up sucking. His mention of cryptocurrency and the inclusion of an NFT makes sense as well, as the argument of security versus commodity is a major point of contention when it comes to cryptocurrency regulation. Many in the cryptosphere want it to be labeled as a commodity because they're regulated by the less stringent CFTC. This also aligns with a very long presentation Blitz gave to the Libertarian Party of Wake County.
We actually were #1 in distilled spirits production all through Prohibition. We were the #1 spirits producing state. So it just goes to show you, people are going to do what they want to do, right?
I'm sure many of you have connected the dots by now, but when I took a step back and looked at all the information available to me, I saw a guy who wants to do whatever he wants to do, who openly says he wants a specific governing body to stay away from his business, and says he will keep a portion of your deposit money if he can't deliver the product he's selling, but won't say how much that portion will be, and it all reminded me of something I heard recently.
This made no sense to me at all, and my BS detector went off.
Now, in all fairness, I don't know these people or their business practices, but with the language they've laid out, I don't really see what would stop them from saying that the app and events cost whatever the mission costs them should it fail. All of this, of course, is purely speculation, but with everything I've mentioned in the past half hour, I don't think I personally would give this guy 75 grand. Well, that's about all the interesting bits from this interview, except, oh my god, clean your fucking glasses, Jonathan. Unfortunately, there's no blockbuster end to this story, as there's been no news since this first started making the rounds in January. But I did receive an email from the distillery that was pretty on brand. Announcing Mystic Bourbon Beef. Maybe I'm just a little cranky from being so annoyed by this story and I'm nitpicking now, but calling it bourbon beef is a little silly. Selling spent mash to farmers is pretty common since it's such a massive byproduct that's otherwise difficult and expensive to dispose of. Framing it as bourbon beef seems to be implying some sort of influence from their bourbon specifically, but spent mash is basically just oatmeal. Also, it seems bad to give alcohol to cows. Hey, shut up. But that didn't stop Mystic from selling out of $70 packages of filet mignon and burger patties. Whatever. Anyway, who knows if this actually happens? I can't really see it, but that honestly may be the best case scenario for Mystic Farm. If they end up not taking such a massive risk, they save tens of millions of dollars and avoid a potentially embarrassing conclusion. Plus, the attention they've gotten from this story is worth its weight in Earth orbit payload. I honestly had never heard of Mystic Farm before this story, and in PR terms, that's a win. But if they do end up going through with this, there is some good news, because we actually do know that space-aging whiskey has a monumental effect on its flavor profile. Unfortunately for Mystic Farm, we know that because it's been done already. In 2011, Scottish distillery Ardbeg teamed up with a Houston-based company called NanoRacks to send vials of whiskey to the International Space Station, and they had a much more coherent goal in mind.
It's only been in the last few decades with the space age that we can play around and do things without that force that we call 1G. What happens if you grow molecules, in this case terpenes that were grown in whiskey, without that 1G? What do we learn?
Though NASA prohibits commercial use of their services, Ardbeg and NanoRacks were given approval on the basis of studying the effects of zero gravity on terpenes, a class of organic compounds that give whiskey its flavor. While they weren't able to send up full barrels, they did mimic wood aging by using NanoRacks mix sticks to combine Ardbeg's whiskey with wood shavings from their barrels. This, by the way, is another example of clever use of language, because though everything in Mystic's marketing leads you to believe they'll be the first to ever have space whiskey, they're very careful to say they'll be the first to have commercial space whiskey.
And this is the result of this. This is the actual International Space Station liquid, which has been up there in conditions of microgravity for 2.5 years.
When they returned to Earth, they were compared to identical mix sticks aged at the distillery using gas spectrometry, mass spectrometry, and high-performance liquid chromatography. While most of the analysis determined the space whiskey and the Earth whiskey to be chemically very similar, the HPLC test on wood extraction is where they began to see some difference.
When myself and my team went to nose and taste the samples, organoleptic analysis, I was quite astonished at how different the samples were. Up on the space station, it was a whole new range of samples, some flavors I hadn't encountered before.
What's also unfortunate for Mystic is those new flavors were apparently not good ones. The guy speaking in this video is Dr. Bill Lumsden, an icon in the world of whiskey. He holds quite the title as the director of distilling, whiskey creation, and whiskey stocks of both Ardbeg and Glenmorangie distilleries. distilleries. He also has a PhD in biochemistry and has been lovingly nicknamed the Willy Wonka of whiskey due to the indelible, creative, and innovative stamp he's left on the industry. And in reviewing his own experiment, he admits he prefers earth-aged whiskey and describes the space whiskey's aftertaste as pungent, intense, and long, with hints of wood, antiseptic lozenges, and rubbery smoke. Yum. He goes on to say that the space whiskey does have strong flavor, though he describes it as strange and not particularly good. I mean, it doesn't look good. Looks like a glass of tar. What's really interesting is I couldn't find much more info on this. The video claims to be the long-awaited reveal and review, but it abruptly ends before the three experts taste or even smell it. Dr. Lumsden published an extensive paper on his findings, but that seems to have been scrubbed from Ardbeg's website, and I can't find it anywhere else. Ardbeg, from what I can tell, seems to have moved on from this project. Now, you might think this leaves Mystic wide open to corner the space whiskey market, but it turns out Suntory also sent whiskey to space. They sent samples of their whiskey to the International Space Station with the intent of bringing some back 1 year later and the rest to age at least 2 years. However, I can't find any acknowledgement of this on Suntory's website or any info on the samples returning to Earth. So maybe space whiskey just sucks. I mean, if two of the world's top whiskey producers couldn't pull it off, it could just mean that this isn't a viable or worthwhile endeavor. But, to be fair, many of history's greatest innovations were met with massive skepticism, so maybe in this case, I'm just another one of those short-sighted idiots. Probably not. But, maybe. Ugh. I need a drink after all that. Unfortunately, as a lowly peasant, all I was able to afford was this boring Mississippi barge-aged whiskey. Not bad for some amateurs. If you made it this far, I'm so glad you found this as interesting as I did, and thank you so much for watching. Hopefully we get some more news on Mystic Galactic and I can do a follow-up someday. Please like and subscribe if you feel so inclined, and as always, rock and stone, brothers and sisters.